not the best sometimes, but we worked it out. It's fine. So I'm glad you're all here for week 2 of this experience. We're going to dive back into mobile technology. Mary, thank you for your heads up about my audio. I'm going to try to adjust as I go, see if that helps. As I go through, we'll see if that helps. If it's still not good, let me know. It could be potentially on your end. It could be on mine also. So I wouldn't rule that out for sure, but I will make an effort to speak clear into the microphone. As we go through our week today, we're going to talk about, basically, we'll talk about the fun stuff. We'll talk about the apps, the software in the cloud, everything that we start using on these mobile devices. We're going to start talking about that this week. It's going to continue on to next week, so there'll be in-between activities that we'll work on. So make sure that you check in to the online platform and see the activities that are there, because what I'll end up doing today is we'll hit on some of the tools, but there's certainly no way we'll come across all of them today, and even all of them next week. There's just too many tools out there. So what I did today was try to structure something for us to give a snapshot of tools and a little bit of a dive into them. And then what we'll do is, through your own exploration, hopefully you'll be able to explore deeper, and we'll be able to share those experiences with all of us as we go through. Well, let me take a step back. Before we dive into week 2, just a week 1 review. And on the CTD website, there was a few activities for you guys to work on, and I was going through, and I noticed that there wasn't any activity in the forum. So I want to make sure that people were able to see the activities and you were able to get in there. And so as we go through, if you could just maybe pop your experiences into the chat window, if you had struggles getting into it, if it worked, if it didn't work, whatever it might be, because I want to make sure people have access to that. It's a nice way to extend the learning and make it a little more, give you a little more experience with the technology as opposed to just sitting and just watching with the technology running. And I certainly wanted to make sure to mention that as you go through that, if you visit no other link from last week except for the K through 12 blueprint, please do that one, as that really is great resources for you to review. Tons of resources in there, including some really nice checklist forms. And I mentioned last week the idea of the tech readiness tools, and so they are very nice in there. So make sure you get a chance to do that. And again, the activities are what's going to cement this and make the understanding. And so I'm hoping that we all take some time and dive into those a little deeply. And Jackie just posted the link for the blueprint in the window. Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate it. But really, really powerful stuff. All right, so here we are. What's our plan? You remember this slide from last week? We'll go through. Sorry, I saw Susan popped up. Thanks, Susan. I appreciate you entering that in. We'll have to figure out where it went. I didn't see it in the forum, so I'll have to check and see where that information went. I was searching the forums from last week to now, and I didn't see any notes in there, but perhaps it went somewhere. I'll have to investigate that. But I appreciate that. Good work, Susan. I want your work to be known, so I'll find it for you, and we'll make sure it gets in there. So where are we in our big plan here? 4 weeks of meeting together, in addition to our exploration together as we go through and look at some tools. We are in week 2, which is the beginning of apps, software in the cloud. And so we'll talk about a little of those today. We'll share your resources as we go. If you share them in the chat window, that's fantastic. If you have other pieces of information that we don't necessarily hit on today, but you want to have it put in there, please feel free, drop it in that chat window. Go back to the forum that's on the webpage, and hopefully Jackie will drop the link in there for the forums. That's me asking, hoping that she'll do it for me. but drop the link in there so that you guys can see where the forums are. It's a nice opportunity for us to connect through these kind of threaded discussions about the different areas and what we're looking at. So I'm hoping that you dive into those a little bit. So with that said, look at that. Jack dives right in there and puts that. Thank you. All right, we'll dive into week 2. Remember, the chat window's there. Use it. It's great. If I don't see it right away, don't panic. I'll look over there every once in a while, and hopefully I'll see it as we go through. I'll make sure to pay attention to the window, make sure I'm not missing anything. What are we going to look at today? Well, we're going to start the idea of talking about using these devices in the classroom. So all of our mobile devices we mentioned last week, all the different platforms, everything else we talked about last week. But today we're going to focus on the idea of what goes on those devices. So we're going past the assumption that the devices are there. We have devices of some kind, but what are we going to do on them? So we're going to touch on accessible educational materials. We're going to talk about the differences between using something on a website or using an app for something, and what are the positives and negatives of each. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll start diving into tools a little bit. I'll show you some. We'll move through a little of them, give you some examples of how you might be able to use them, and all of that being a precursor for the activities that we'll work on individually throughout the rest of the week leading up to next week. And then we'll be able to share some of those as we get together next week in person. That's kind of thought process here as we move through. So hopefully that works for you for the next little bit. And so as we move through, again, today we'll focus on the idea of looking at the tools that run in it. I'm just looking in the window. Okay, so Jackie posted a link, and someone said the page was not there. It said it was a 404, so the link wasn't there. Jackie will work on that link and get it to you guys and figure out why. So when we think about the idea of using our mobile devices, we talked about this last week. So we're going to start trying to utilize the power of these devices in our classrooms. What I will caution us with, and I think this becomes part of our responsibility as technology people, is reminding people to focus on the right direction with this information. And what I mean by that, because I didn't communicate that very well, but what I mean by that is that we're not letting the technology drive the situation. What we're really doing is trying to facilitate learning. And this was really nice. This came up from the gentleman here. This is a post from his Twitter that I saw the other day, and I thought, oh, it's just a perfect way to kind of give us a synopsis of what I mean by this. And I apologize, I don't know his first name. It's just Barshinger is his Twitter handle, @Barshinger. But a really nice graphic. I don't know if it's his, I don't know where he got it from, but I gave him credit at least, so we'll go from there. But the idea of thinking about, it's not all about the technology, but it should be about what are the students accomplishing with that technology. And so we won't read them all, but some of the ones that just kind of grabbed me, and I thought the graphic was very strong. Ones like, yay, my students all have digital portfolios this year. So instead of saying that, focus instead and say, yay, my students show evidence of their learning. Take the technology out of it. Yes, technology is great. The tool is there simply to help, simply to provide support. We can't get overwhelmed by the idea of I must use every buzzword I can think of regarding technology. And you see some of them even in this kind of in the left-hand column where it says, instead of saying this, looking at the idea of using clickers and surveys in class. Well, instead of that, how about focusing and saying, I collect feedback really fast in my class, so I know immediately when I need to reteach something. So you have the idea of what is the purpose of that technology. Less about the technology itself, more about the actual end result, what we're hoping to achieve. And so I always like to put that in there when I start talking about tools, because especially when we have any of these weeks where we talk about things like apps and software, and people start to go down the rabbit hole of apps, and sometimes forget to take a pause and take a step back and say, all right, what am I really trying to accomplish here? It's not about having the most apps I can have on a device. And there's a school that I work in where one of the teachers had come up to me and she said to me, because I provide the tech support, and she said, I'm going to need another iPad. And I said to her, oh, okay, well, what happened to your iPad? Is it broken? Maybe we can get it repaired. And she said, no, it's not broken, but it's full. It's full of apps, and I need another iPad to put more apps on. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And she's kind of, I appreciate the fact that she's finding apps. And so naturally the question started to come of what I had said to her is, well, what are you doing with this iPad? What are you doing with these apps? Tell me what you do with your device in your class, because you must be using them. This is great. And she had trouble identifying anything she had done with any of these apps in class. And so what she had was, she had 700 apps on her iPad or whatever it was, which is fine, but could not take a second to explain how she had used any of them to further the instruction in the classroom. And so we had a discussion about, you don't need another iPad. What you need is to take a step back and say, well, what are you doing with this iPad? And just because an app is free doesn't mean you should get it. If you can't think of a good reason to get it, there's no reason to install it on your device. So it's important to take a step back with people and remind them that more is not always better in the world of apps. So let's start our discussion. We'll talk about the idea of accessible educational material and thinking about the idea of moving towards potentially a paperless classroom, thinking about technology and how we can apply technology. And what we're hoping to do is find ways to successfully provide materials to all of our learners. And all of those learners have unique needs. And so how are we doing that while we're working on making sure we use the technology devices in our room? Now, if you're not familiar with the term accessible educational materials, it's kind of the new slant that CAST has put on this, which is the idea, and CAST, if you're not familiar, the CAST is the Center for Accessible Specialized Technology. Yeah, I believe that's it. If that's not it, I apologize to the CAST people. But what happens on that website, a whole host of resources on that website. So what we're looking at, as opposed to the ideal of accessible instructional materials, which is what the term previously was, which was AIM, now we're looking at accessible educational materials and focusing on the idea of all of the materials that support the person's education, not just textbooks and other documentation that provides that content, but instead all of the materials that happen throughout classroom. So we're looking at ideas to make sure that we can find some way to take these materials that might be print, and how do we get them in an accessible format so that we can use the mobile devices in order to better meet our student needs. And so I'll give you just a couple quick examples here. As we go through, just some sense, and these are not meant to be all of the answers, but far from it, and I'll tell you, these are far from all the answers. But I want to give you a sense of different types of tools that are out there. And perhaps if you haven't seen them yet, these might be tools that you want to explore, see if they make sense in your situation. And so when I think about the idea of providing access to print materials, the idea being, how can I take something that is a print piece of paper in front of me and get it into a mobile device that now I can utilize the tools and supports within that device in order to make it accessible for my learner. And so the first one I have up here is an app that works on the iOS devices. It also works on your Mac as well. So if you're a Mac user, you can use this in both places. But this is called Prismo. And the idea with Prismo is that I can take a picture of a document, and the app will do the optical character recognition to convert that picture to text. And then the app provides some support within that app to give me text-to-speech out. So what I have is the ability to take something that lives in a print form, convert it into a digital form, and then provide access to my student as I go. So they can have things read back to them. The ability to do annotations in a document right on the device and not have to worry about the idea of looking at ways to get that material in. Some of the biggest problems sometimes is that for documents we use in our classroom that don't start their life in our classroom as electronic, we have a hard time figuring out how to incorporate mobile devices into that situation. Now, if something starts its life as a Word document that you use or a Google document, well, that's a whole other story. That item is already digital, much easier to deal with. I'm thinking of every other piece of technology, every other piece of paper that's in our room, trying to get usable for one of our students, looking at ways to do that. And so this is one of them. There's others that do it. And so, like I said, none of these pictures that I share, none of these apps or extensions or any software tools that I show is meant to say this is the best one or the only one. These are just some of the examples. And so please make sure that I'll make sure I say that a bunch of times. I just want to make sure. I think partly what ends up happening as technology people, our job becomes figuring out with the team what makes the most sense for the student we're working with, for the individual we're working with. Out of these tools, understanding what they do and what they are, and then figuring out how to best match that to the individual we're working with. One of the other ones that I'll point out again, so I'm trying to give you ones that kind of cut across some of the platforms and some of the abilities to use them. The next two that I'll show you are actually Chrome extensions that work on the computer or a Chromebook. This one is Snap and Read Universal from Don Johnson. And what's interesting about this, if you've used this software in the past, this is a software that provides text-to-speech support. What's nice is that it provides it for accessible text and inaccessible text. And what I mean by inaccessible text is that sometimes even in our classrooms, we incorporate mobile devices, so perhaps the whole entire class uses Chromebooks, and the school has their textbook online, so they have an online version of their textbook, which is great. People automatically assume that an online textbook will be accessible to individuals, but not always. There's many times where you might go to a website for an online textbook, and any of the text-to-speech tools that we use will not recognize the text on that page. It sees that page simply as a photo. And so what we need to do is find a way to take that text, get that text out of that picture, and have it read aloud to someone. And so the Snap and Read Universal does a nice job of being able to allow you to highlight blocks of text. It does the OCR, optical character recognition scanning, and converts it to text, then becomes able to be read out loud. And so now the person can have support in all of these areas on the computer, whether it's a textbook, a picture that perhaps, or a graphic that perhaps has any kind of tag on it. You could scan that and then it would read the tag. But what the Chrome extension does, which is really nice and something that we're starting to find ways to explore with someone, especially we're thinking about providing different levels of support for individuals who might need customized text. The Chrome extension for Snap and Read will allow you to do text leveling. So I'll be able to control the complexity of the text on the screen. And so what the extension does is as you scan through the text, it figures out from some predetermined set point that you've said, I want my text to be a certain level of complexity. And it will convert the words on the screen to something that perhaps is easier for the student to read. And so it may take the word deaf and convert it to hard of hearing, or doesn't hear well, or doesn't hear, whatever it might be. And so looking at ways to change the text on the screen so that the individual can listen to it and then draw meaning from it, really, really powerful as it goes through. So that's another one that, as we start thinking about providing levels of support for our students. Again, we talked about hardware last week, so understanding, and Jackie asked, so meaning making the text accessible while keeping the content is what Jackie just asked. And yes, Jackie, basically the content is there, and what I'm doing is changing the complexity of the reading passage so that someone who might not understand it has a better opportunity to understand the text there. It keeps the meaning, but perhaps change some of the vocabulary to make it easier for someone to understand. And so that's good. Thank you for keeping me honest there. I appreciate it. But thinking about a way to do that. The other one I'll show, and again, thinking about ways to get paper into our computers, thinking about ways to get our material accessible to someone. And this is another one that works in the Chrome browser. This is from TextHelp. And this is our Read Write for Google extension. And then this is combined with another app that TextHelp does, which is called SnapVerter. And the idea with this is that now I can utilize my mobile device to take a picture of any document I have in front of me. The picture gets uploaded into my Google Drive, and then my Google Drive through the SnapVerter app converts it to text and does the OCR. So now I can have that read aloud to me. And so these are two tools working with each other to perform this task. So the SnapVerter takes the picture, converts it to text, and then the Read Write for Google tool allows me to read it out loud, annotate the page, and if you notice the picture on the screen there, I was able to use this with a student, and they were able to click in any of the boxes there that were on this form. So it was a worksheet. They were talking about the pioneers moving west, and so this was the wagon supply list. So they had to come up with the idea of what they would bring with them, how many items they would bring, and how much the weight would be. And so for this worksheet, they were able to go through, the students I was working with, and type their answers into the page while they were listening to it, so it was able to be read out loud. So if you'll notice at the top, it's got the yellow and blue highlighting because it was reading that out loud to the student. So the sentence was yellow. The word being spoken at that moment was blue. And so I'm getting the dual highlighting to support me. I'm getting the ability to annotate that page. I can highlight things on the page. I can put in pins for reminders, and I can add my own text in there. When I'm done with my form, it's in my Google Drive because, again, it's relying on the power of Google Drive here. And so with that, what we're able to do is the minute the student is done, the student shares that document back out with the teacher electronically. The teacher can see the answers, and they're able to grade their work. And so we've moved from a paper worksheet to a completely digital worksheet that the teacher just then simply puts into a folder and keeps a copy of it to have as documentation for what the student did. So again, looking at using the power of these tools. And I think what's interesting in the past couple slides, you'll notice the tools I'm showing you are coming from our assistive technology manufacturers and vendors. So now they're starting to recognize the power of these mobile devices and accommodate students accordingly with the kinds of levels of supports that we're familiar with in the third-party software that we used to use. But now, these same tools available for all of the platforms that we're now faced with in our classroom. So it's a nice opportunity to get those features in, have the ability for our students to take content the way they need it, which is huge for these mobile devices. Because just having them in the classroom doesn't help if the tools are not on those devices to help them get through the assignments and the work they need to do. And again, there's others, but I'm just throwing them out there, just some examples. as, as we roll through, the next kind of bigger area that I wanted to touch on was the idea of thinking about making our own material. And what does that look like? And so we talk about the idea of becoming your own digital publisher. And so on the screen, we have a picture of, on the left is the printing press leading up to today, which is really how many apps do we use today that have that new logo that has become kind of a universal, the square with the arrow sticking out of it, which is giving us that sense that it's able to export out to something or publish out. And I love the quote on the bottom. I share it all the time with people. It's from Clay Shirky. And his quote is, "Publishing is no longer a job, but a button." So now we think about the idea of how many opportunities do we have to provide the materials that our students need and publish this information to get it out to them. I'm not even talking about the fact yet of how many apps and tools do we have that allow our students to publish their own work to demonstrate knowledge. That's a whole other story for later in the discussion. But right now, just thinking about the idea of giving us opportunities to put this work out there to students. And so, do we do things that provide them support across platforms and different ways that we can provide them? So some of the interesting things that we can look at, and if you're not familiar with Tar Heel Reader, tarheelreader.org, there's a link up there. With that, you can go to the website and create your own books that now your students can access right from their computer screen. So if you're going to make materials and have them available to students, you can search them and access them that way. One of the other nice things about Tar Heel Reader, why it's such a nice one to share with people, is that Tar Heel Reader is accessible to switches. So if you have somebody who's using alternate access, they have the ability to use switches to control the books back and forth, the pages, flipping. The other one on this list is one that I use constantly, and I'm always surprised that people just don't know about it. And so I always try to make sure I put it in when I think about the idea of publishing work and getting materials done. But the idea of using something, this is a tool, another website, it's called readlists.com. And what this website allows you to do is create a page where, and this is the screenshot for the list that I pulled together. And the link is there on the screen. If anybody wants to go to it in your browser, you'll actually see that page. I just put it up there. Not the greatest example, but just to give you a sense of what this does. When you go to the ReadList website, it allows you to drop in articles. So you drop in the URL for an article, and you can add in a bunch of resources onto the page. And if you look to the left, you have the ability to export this out to use in all kinds of formats. You can send this to a Kindle. You can send it to an iPhone or an iPad. You can save this to a Dropbox, or basically create your own book. And what this website does is it takes all of your articles that you've added in there, and it pulls them all out and makes a book out of this, where each article you have is basically a chapter in this book. And what you can do is pull together some pretty big amounts of information and then share it with the student. You can either email them the link, you can share it with them through any other resource you might have, whether it's Dropbox or anything else, or download an actual file that is the electronic book file. And what you end up having is now a file that you can push out to a student, and they can pretty much open on just about every device you could think of. And what that does is it downloads it as an EPUB file. And so now we start talking about the idea of, okay, I know what devices I have, but now what file format do my devices play when it comes to books? And so if you think about an EPUB is the name of the file, EPUB. And that is a file format that will play on your iPad, that'll play on your Android devices. You can have software tools installed on your computer to allow it to play EPUB files. Really, the only devices an EPUB file will not play on is a Kindle. So Kindle needs to have its own file format, and so that's why you see that it says there on the export, send to Kindle. Kindle is its own unique thing. But everything else will allow you to play in EPUB. So what I can do, and what I've done in the past, is we've created with teachers that we work through a bunch of articles online or pieces of content online that they want to share with the students and made it into a read list. And then what they do is when they share the link of this out on their class webpage, and then no matter what device the student logs in with or uses, they have access to the same material. It looks the same. They're getting the same resources. Again, it makes the device irrelevant at that point. You become device independent. It doesn't matter what I have, because what matters is that I have the content. So that's what you end up getting. So a really nice one. Play with that one if you can. Readlist.com. Great, great website. And then if we think of things that are potentially device specific, I threw a couple on here just to give us kind of a sense of what these are. But we have, if you're a Mac user and you want to create books to use on the iPad, there's iBooks Author. So if you want to download that software, it's a free software tool, and it allows you to make multimedia books with all kinds of embedded supports. Now, the trick here is that you have to have a Mac in order to make the books, so the software itself will only run on the Mac. And then the books you make are iPad books. They won't play on the iPad. But again, if that's the platform you have, well, then that's perfect. The other one I have there, to give another sense, is the Book Creator app. And so when I start thinking about ones to share that are good examples, the Book Creator is a good one. It runs on the iOS or the Android, so it can run on either platform. And again, allows me to build multimedia books with pictures, text, embedded audio, any of these supports in there. And then those files can be shared to other devices. What's really interesting is that Book Creator also does a nice touch where you can, at the end, you can export your book out to become a video file. So if you want to create videos that someone watches, that will just play. It'll just cycle through the pages, and it will, if there's audio embedded, it will just play the audio. If there's a video embedded, it will just play the video automatically. And so now you have the ability to provide your students with those pieces of material, those resources as they go through, regardless of the device they're on. So that becomes a huge thing as we move through and can kind of dig a little deeper into this idea of the main areas we were talking about today, which is apps, software, and the cloud. And so we think about that, well, what are the positives of each? What are the positives or negatives? And when I think about what's better, better is going to be different for each of us, and better is going to be different potentially for each situation we're in. But when we think about the benefits potentially or the advantages of using a web tool to connect our students with material. Now this is either a website that you build. So with this I would even think of something like a Google site or a Wikispace. Either of those tools are free and will allow you to build your own materials, your own web page. And so you think about some of these advantages of doing that, is the fact that it can be immediate. I can get that stuff up right away. There is no waiting. It's compatible. Now, the beauty of that is that pretty much across devices, as long as these devices are connected to the internet, they'll be able to use that material. I can upgrade the information, again, quickly. So if I decide I want to add something to it, I can just add it to and just go to it. Do I search for it? So findability, shareability, the ability to get things out to people quick. The reach, again, because I can use it on any device that has a browser in it and has internet access, I've kind of eliminated the worry of, well, what device does my end user have? That becomes irrelevant. And the cost. I mean, the two I mentioned are free. And if anyone's a Google Site user, I mean, that's the one I tend to use a lot now, you can do just about anything in a Google site, from text to pictures to embedded forms and embedded pieces of information, videos, shared spaces that people can write in, whatever it might be. All of that in a free tool. And as long as everybody has a web address and has a device connected to the internet, it doesn't matter what device they're using. So one of the other things that I wanted to throw a couple pictures up for you, just to kind of give you a sense to one thing to consider with some of these free websites as you start thinking about building your material. And so what is on this page, there's 4 pictures on this page. It's the same exact website. It was created in a wiki space. So it's a free web page that allows you to build it and embed materials into it. The first 2 pictures on the top are what the site looks like in Safari on an iPad, which is fine. It looks a little different. On the left-hand side, it's just basically the text of the page, but no navigation. When I click on the navigation, I get the picture on the right-hand side, which is fine. Now I have the navigation on the left, but I don't have the text of the page anymore. So if my student is struggling to understand where to go in the steps of the process, that could become really tricky for them. On the bottom 2 pictures, the same web page on an iPad again, but now using the Chrome app to get to the web. And so on the left, it looks very similar to what Safari looked like. But the difference with Chrome, which helped, is that Chrome has a setting where I can pull it down and request the desktop site. And when I do that, the picture on the right appears, and basically in Chrome on my iPad, that web page looks identical to the web page that I was looking at on a computer. And so I've eliminated the issue of what does the site look like depending on where I am. And so we consider that as we think about iPads and Android tablets, and even on the next page, any other device we might be using. The pictures on this page are 2 different Kindles. One, the top picture is Kindle Fire, which again, presented it in the same way that a desktop website would look. The bottom picture is what the same website looks on a Kindle, just the regular, I'll call it old, even though I just put quotes around it in my queue here, the old Kindles, where they're those gray devices which do get on the web and do have that access, but now I'm very limited into what I can see. And so what I would just remind you is that as we go through and set materials up, be aware of what these materials and web pages are going to look like on different devices. Or the flip side of that is you may have something like an app like Evernote, which is the picture up here. So if you're looking at a way to organize a student and have them do note-taking and any of those other supports, they may have an opportunity to have their material pretty much present itself in the same similar way across devices. And so now we have an opportunity here where if I'm using Evernote to organize myself, create notebooks, write notes as I'm in class, do assignments, whatever it might be, anytime I make a change in one device, that change translates to every other device I have connected to that account. So now I have that ability of moving across devices. Again, irrelevant what device I'm on. But my information is there and the way I access it is the same. So now I'm able to move through and not have to relearn each time I get into another mobile device, which is huge. And then here's just another example. This is one from CAST, which I really like, which is looking at a web resource. And so these are what are called the UDL editions by CAST. And the UDL editions are books that you might be familiar with, but it also provides different levels of support. On the right-hand side, it's maximum support, moderate support, and minimal support. And then I have text-to-speech built into it also. So you start to see how you can use these as this web resource on any device and provide your students different levels of support that they might need. And on the bottom, it reminds you, coming up this week, that's one of our activities. It's part of the CAST page, and you can go review that and explore that a little bit and report back. That's one of the things we'll look at on the CAST page. When we think about apps versus websites, so what's the advantage of an app? For some of our learners, the fact that it has potentially more interactivity, or it's kind of gamified the learning a little bit, helps connect to some of our learners. We see that there's opportunity to have regular usage because it exists right on their device, whatever that device is. It can personalize that information potentially, and so they can adjust how it looks, how it reacts to them, and the settings that happen, versus a web page where we're setting it up one way, and any change they make, they might have to make when they get to it. A lot of our apps now are doing a nice job at collecting some data. Not all, and not all of them collect it the same way. So again, even though we're talking about data collection, you need to go deep into your app to figure out what is it actually collecting, and make sure that that's what you need it to collect. But one of the other things which is really interesting is when we think about using apps on the mobile devices, is the potential to access the other functions of those devices right through the app. The recorder, the camera, the video, all of those things embedded and having their functionality become part of the app that a student is in. It's very important for some of our students. Now, like anything else, when we start talking about apps, I mentioned before the idea of the teacher that I worked with who had too many apps that her device wouldn't run. This is really an idea. And Mary, I'm just reading your question now, Mary, sorry. Was there a resource from this series to help identify the best device for a student to use, the primary device? And Mary, I would say, as we go through this, we started, unless we look at the features of all the different devices, it becomes an issue of matching that student to that device. What is the device features? And I'll make myself a note, Mary, and I have a really nice device feature website, and I'll make sure I add that in to the chat, not to the chat room, but I'll add it into the forum when we're done. Sorry, I'm just writing myself a note as we start. That's good, thank you. Thank you, Mary. But the idea of thinking about the apps, and again, remembering that more is not better. Having so many that I can't turn my device on is not using my device well. I would argue you use your device better if you have only 3 or 4 apps, but you use them constantly to meet your needs. Can you get away with just using the apps that are already in the device? I worked with an older individual. He was transitioning out of a day program into a community situation for work. And he's an individual with some significant cognitive disabilities. And the fear was that the device would be too complicated if we started putting all of these apps on it. And what we found when we started coming down to the list of, well, what does he need to do? When we started kind of dialing in that list a little bit and thinking about what the apps that are already on his device, we recognized that everything he needed already lived on his device. There was no reason to put any other apps on it. And so we were able to support him with everything that came on the device right out of the box, and it worked perfectly for him. And so the idea of thinking about and remembering, this is my moment to remind us about the SET framework again, thinking about the person, take a step back, think about what they need to do and how they're going to do it, and then we figure out what the apps do and how we figure out which apps work. And a lot of it talks about the idea, and Kathy Schrock is where this picture's from, and I have her resource listed in our resources for this week. It's one of the activities. But Kathy does a really nice job of talking about the idea of looking at Bloom's taxonomy, thinking about cognitively what are we looking to accomplish with these apps in order to meet the needs of our students, and looking at the idea of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, and evaluating And ultimately, those wheels on the outside are all factoring into the issue of creating something too. So are we working to provide our students that support in order to demonstrate their knowledge? And this came from Kathy's site too, the idea of the app evaluation rubric. Because you think about the idea that people choose apps because they go free one day, or they heard somebody used one and it worked really well. And sometimes people don't really have a good definition of why they're using an app. And so for the teachers I support, I do a lot of this pushing out to them with evaluation rubrics that they can tell me why an app makes sense for them and their students. So taking it back to them and saying, okay, I get it that app, only costs 99 cents. That's fine. But is that app going to do what you want it to do? And do you even know what you want that app to do? And that's an interesting question sometimes too, is that people don't even know what they want those apps to do. And so giving them the rubrics to be able to document and show what they're going to, how this app fits into their needs, as well as demonstrate how they're going to use this app to meet a student's needs. And Kathy has a nice one on her website there. That is it's the rubric, and then it asks a couple open-ended questions to have someone explain why you're going to use an app, how you're going to use it, and how you're going to be able to use that to demonstrate student knowledge of a subject. So thinking about that as we move through, really important as we go through and think about what these apps and extensions do. As we move through all of our activities between this week and next, and then when we follow up again next week and talk, I'm going to talk about them all in the context of Universal Design for Learning. Again, this comes from CAST. The talk here is about finding ways to engage our learners and engage the three networks of their brain: the recognition network, the strategic, and the affective network. Each of those networks of the brain, I moved my slides, and these are two of your activities. You're going to look at the periodic table of iPad apps. What's nice about this one, and I threw it in here because this one has some crossover to other apps as well, for Android and other Chrome supports, so that's why that one's here. And you'll have resources for this in your activities for the week. And then finally, if you've never seen Barbara Walsford's UDL app placemat, this is fantastic. It's focused on iOS apps, but using that and clicking on each of the icons will bring you to the iTunes store. A good number of these apps have an alternative that works on other devices. So it's there to just kind of give you some thought and some structure, and this will help kind of move you to the next platform potentially. Not everyone has an alternate in the other platforms, but a lot of them do. YouTube works everywhere. Those kind of things, start seeing, well, if it's not called Recorder in this, maybe it's called the Voice Recorder in Android. So thinking about the crossover there, but it's a really nice resource that we move through. And the thought being, and what I was hoping to accomplish with this as we move through, is the idea of, I jumped through, making sure, and if you've never seen the guidelines for UDL, that's what these are all about, looking at ways to provide multiple means of these three areas for our students. So looking at multiple means of engagement. And so these are the guidelines that go with that. So again, for this one, we're talking about the idea of addressing the affective network in the individual's brain, in the student's brain. Give them that sense of why. Why do I want to learn this? And the idea being, I'm going to recruit interest. I'm going to provide an option to sustain effort, and then also provide options for self-regulation. So you get the sense of, are my apps doing this for my student? Are my tools that I put in place doing this for my student? And engaging them in. Once I've engaged them, then I can look for other ways to make sure I'm presenting the information to them in different ways. So in representation, which is attached to the recognition network of the brain, so the what of learning, that idea. And so we think about that as provide options for perception. So how can I customize information that's displayed to a student to best meet their needs? Provide options for language and symbols. So if my student struggles with vocabulary, do I have a built-in dictionary somewhere? Does that dictionary have text definitions as well as picture representation? If my student needs deeper information about a certain topic, can they click somewhere and get more information if they need it? So you think about, for example, if you go to a Wikipedia page, and Wikipedia is a good example of this, you can read the basic definition, but as you go through those definitions, every once in a while, a word is hyperlinked off to something else. So if I struggle and don't understand what that one word means, I could potentially click there and be brought to a whole other page to learn whatever that term means and then come back to where I was. So if I need additional options to help me with comprehension, I can do that. I can move off to get information and then come back. If I don't need it, I just continue to read. But if I do, it gives me that level of support. So looking at representation of information. And then finally, the last one, looking at giving the student multiple means for action and expression. How do I show what I know? So giving them options to express themselves with whatever tools there might be. So we'll see this in the tools that you guys look at, is the idea of finding a way to demonstrate knowledge and share information that I've acquired back out. So looking at options for physical action, options for expressive skills and fluency, and then options for executive function. Again, providing them a framework to make sure they're able to demonstrate their information back out. Your last activity of the week is giving you an opportunity to become your own movie director. And you can use one of these two apps. If you're using it on an iOS device, you're going to use the app that's listed at the top, which is called 30 Hands, the number 30 and then the word hands. If you're an Android user, you're going to use the app at the bottom called Animoto. And these are all listed in the activity. But what each of these allows you to do is take pictures with a mobile device, record audio over them, and then create a movie that you can then share with someone. And so the idea with this, and what I said in the activity, is think of a way that you could use this kind of tool to either demonstrate knowledge, engage a learner, provide support for an activity or task. Think about how you would use this in your own work with the people you are supporting, and take this away. This to me has become one of the 30 Hands, and even Animoto to a sense, has become one of the most powerful apps that I use on mobile devices to connect learning for individuals. And so I'll leave that for you to become your own director and be creative. Think of something that really would be useful for you that you could take from it, because I want you to make this real for you. So I'll give you the framework, but I'll let you plug in whatever it is that you're going to want to do with it. So with that said, it's 3 o'clock. Well, it's 3 o'clock here on the East Coast. I don't know where you are, but it's the top of the hour. How about that? So as we go through, you guys did a nice job again of posting in questions, and I appreciate that as we go through. It helps make sure I'm being clear and make sure that everybody's kind of with me. But I'll take a minute and see if anybody else has any other questions before we wrap up for the day. Emily, I don't think you did spell it wrong, Emily. I believe I spelled it wrong on the slide. It is with a Z. Try with a Z instead of an S. I feel that was me. I was looking at that too, and as I looked at it, I said, oh, I think I spelled it wrong. I apologize. Check that up. Something tells me that's going to be right, and I'll fix it in the slide also. Good. All right, well, everybody, Remember, we have other activities to do for the week, so please go in and try to do these. Oh, good. I'm glad, Emily. I'm glad you found it good. Do the activities, kind of make the connection with information. You know, it kind of takes sometimes this kind of webinar abstracty kind of information and makes it very, very real, very concrete. So please take a second, do those. Participate in the forums, participate in the technology exploration. Share with each other, because that's the way that you're going to get the most power from something like this. And so, again, as you guys are wrapping up and you're typing in still, I'll keep looking over there. I appreciate your participation. We are scheduled to see each other again in this virtual space next Thursday, the 21st, at 11 o'clock Eastern. So put that in your calendar. I will see you then. Please do the activities during the week.